morning and welcome to Referendum TV. My name is Kevin Robertson. Today I'll be interviewing Natalie McGarry and her mother Alice McGarry, a councillor, or SNP councillor in Inverkeithing for 23 years. Good morning, ladies. 28 years, I do apologise. How are you?
Fine. Good, thank you.
Good. And today, Natalie, you've Women for India have launched a new video.
Yep, launched that this morning.
And you're really quite busy around it, are you?
Yes. I'm surprised we've got to sit down and chat to you, Kevin, but really pleased to be here. It's been really busy this morning. Good response to the video, and you know, the message from the video is very aspirational, in contradiction to the Better Together video that was aimed at women. We want to encourage women to be part of the process and not tell them not to bother doing any research. So.
You want to just explain to people who maybe have not seen the video just what goes on in it?
Yeah, basically the concept of the video, it starts off, it's in anime, so it's a kind of drawn cartoon. We have a woman called Ailey, is travelling around Scotland, so you've got some kind of scenic bits in the background, but she's talking about the kind of Scotland that she lives in, where austerity doesn't attack women and children first, where she's paid equally for her work. There's written rights in the constitution, and there's equal childcare for all families, not just for women, because it's not a women's issue, it's a society issue. And so the thought was that this was kind of a dream, it was almost an imaginary scenario, and then that rubs out to reality with the message that, you know, voting yes gives us the opportunity to make these things a reality. And so it's quite aspirational. It's saying, you know, vote yes because we can change things, we can make a more inclusive and better Scotland. We just need to have the confidence to do so. And the end is 40 women together saying vote yes, we can do it.
Were you there?
I wasn't, no, I was doing something important, I'm sure. Well, we had, you know, we put out a message just the night before and had a great response of women just turning up to get involved, and that's what the campaign's been about.
That was in Glasgow, yeah?
It was in Glasgow, yes.
Yeah, it's done really well there, I can see. Yeah. Just to come on to that, the reason for Women for India being set up was to galvanise support within the female population of Scotland. How successful do you think it's been?
I think that's been really successful, but Women for Independence wasn't just set up. I mean, we had a few pillars that were the structure of the organisation. One was obviously recognising that the polls, even at that early stage in 2012, showed a gender gap in attitudes to independence, but also that the reason that many of us came together in the first place was because of the absence of women's voices. Now, of course, you've got Ruth Davidson and Joanne Lamont and Nicola Sturgeon at the top of their political parties, but there were two debates towards the end of 2011, 2012, or two panel where there were 8 men on BBC or STV, and I think, pale male still. You know, there's nothing wrong with being a balding middle-aged man in a suit, but when you have a when you have a panel of 8 and women or even non-balding middle-aged men looking at panels are not going to see themselves reflected in that. And if you're trying to sell an idea to people, then they have to be able to see themselves reflected in it. So we thought, right, one, we want to convince more women to vote yes. We want to find out what are the barriers and why women aren't voting yes. And we want to encourage more gender balance. But also, the whole name Women for Independence is Women for Independence, Independence for Women. There's no point in voting to change a constitutional system if there's not going to be a knock-on
and that would be
advantage.
Then looking after parental rights and
not just parental rights. You know, that's not just a women's issue, as I've said earlier, but also things like, at the moment, 74% of austerity cuts hit women first and hardest because women are disproportionately child carers or carers or are in low-paid jobs, sometimes to do with childcare. Also, women are still, 40 years after the Equal Pay Act, are still paid 13% less in full-time positions and over 30% less in part-time positions, and are only 22% of or 23% of the representation at Westminster. So it's not really surprising. So we want to have, if we're going to have a new Scotland, it has to be something where women's rights are better. And so we want to be right at the very centre of that and ensure that women's voices are heard.
So there'd be some kind of reform be put in place to ensure that would happen.
Yeah, we can't have an Equalities Act that 40 years ago is fundamentally failing. So if it's enshrined in a constitution, the UK has a very fluid constitution, it's not written down or codified. If it's enshrined as a right and a responsibility on government and on companies, then it's an inescapable right, and we hope that that would improve women's lives, because at the moment, and I'm sure my mum knows this, people working 40 hours a week, women, men, whoever, can't afford to heat their house, and the increase in the number of people having to claim top-up benefits because work doesn't pay is outrageous.
And that's been that's transformed a lot of people's opinion in terms of the debate.
Yeah, I think so. I think people really are struggling, and this horrible dichotomy from Westminster between people that are on benefits and people that are working on benefits, and there's all this blame, and there's a ramping up of feelings against other people in different circumstances that people don't understand because it comes from Daily Mail. And
so they're playing into prejudices,
yeah,
and it ultimately ends up shaming the women involved.
Well, men, women, whoever. And there are so many people who are in work also who can't make work pay and are having to go to benefits and be made to feel as if that's their fault, yet they're working at absolute capacity that they can do. And some are
2 or 3 jobs.
2 or 3 jobs and not having much work-life balance.
I wonder if I can just bring in your mum for a second. Have you found that to be the case on the doorstep when you've canvassed, when you've been able to? The women have been bringing forward issues like bedroom tax and austerity cuts as issues why they might then vote yes.
I would say probably not round the doors. I mean, people are instinctive about why they're voting yes or why they're voting no, and they will have questions that would tend to be in general about benefits and how better Scotland would do in regard to benefits. But as a councillor, I see it on a weekly basis at surgeries, people who simply cannot cope with modern life because they just don't have the means by which to run a normal life. They can't afford to heat their houses, they can't afford to feed their children. They go to food banks, they walk. Before we had a food bank in Inverkeithing, they would walk with their kids to the infirmary because they can't afford the bus fare. It's always 5 miles there and 5 miles back. Right. And that's in an oil-rich country, and it's absolutely offensive. And I think the penny has now dropped amongst the poorer people in regard to a yes vote. These people have absolutely nothing to lose and everything to gain from a yes vote.
Based on that, I mean, I noticed the Survation poll yesterday coming in at 53% for no and 47% for yes, and yet it takes me back to your time in the Cowdenbeath by-election when you were claiming that the canvass returns would show a higher proportion for yes. Can you say some more about that?
Yeah, I mean, when we were canvassing in the Cowdenbeath constituency, especially in areas like Cowdenbeath, like Kelty, where the SNP vote was, Cowdenbeath wasn't too bad, but in Kelty, I was roundly spanked, shall we say, metaphorically, of course, and
it wasn't personal, of course.
It wasn't. I'm sure it was. I hope not. But we said at the time that our canvass returns on independence were really good, and I wasn't personally disappointed about the result because I was so buoyed by the yes results that we had. And we were really mocked by the Labour Party, and I think that the kind of scrambling around we've seen recently is because they haven't taken any cognisance of what's going on the doorsteps. They haven't had as many people on the ground. No. They don't have their ear to the ground. And a wee example, last week I had the gratifying experience of doing a debate in Kelty against my 2 opponents from the Conservatives and the Labour Party. Now, Alec Rowley is the MSP now. He's been a long-term bag carrier or employee.
Bag carrier's fine.
Of Gordon Brown. So he's his protege, so to speak, and his man on the ground. And
Kelty, just to clarify, is the beating heart of Labour in Fife.
Oh yes. Right. Yeah, beating heart. I mean, Alex, a local boy, and at the debate, I mean, we started off, yes, we're at 52 and no, we're at 35, so it was actually quite a good balance, but the fact that the Labour Party couldn't even pack the audience spoke volumes initially, and we ended up with a 62% yes and a swing from undecideds to yes, and even from no to yes as well.
What was the big persuader? What was the convincer for the majority of people, do you think?
Social justice. Absolutely. I mean, Alec Rowley had no answers on how the UK were promoting an agenda of social justice. None. And I think we've seen that with Alistair Darling on TV. The first debate, Salmon struggled, I think we can all admit that, on the currency. He came back with a much stronger argument and a better way of putting it across. It was the same argument, but it was better relayed. And Alistair Darling struggled on the social agenda and other issues, and when he came back, he hadn't done any work on them because he thought he had this kind of noose around Salmon's neck, and it just showed the one dimension of their campaign, and he couldn't move on to the social agenda or more powers for the Parliament.
Just on that campaign, Alice, when you saw Natalie, how she was being treated by the press and how Labour were feeding stories, monitoring where she was going, how was that for you to watch that?
It was absolutely disgusting. I mean, I've known the Labour Party for a very long time in Fife, and I've known Alec Rowley personally. He was a councillor and he was elected at the same time as me, so I've known him for a long time, and I always thought that Alec was a good guy at heart.
Yes.
But to sign off on the filming, the stalking, and the absolute appalling behaviour was actually quite shameful, and I thought it let him down, and it let the campaign down for the Labour Party.
Yeah.
I hope we never ever stoop to anything like that.
Ironically, it's now expanded to a national level in terms of the fear mongering. Today we've got allegedly 2 banks when they moved their headquarters to London. Ironically, one of them is already headquartered there at 25 Gresham Street. How do you guys respond to the bringing the fear down as they've been doing through the press and BBC? The
fact remains is they're moving brass plates, and that's all they're doing. And they say there'll be no impact, but there will be an impact because people like me, whether it's a no or a yes, will be moving all my accounts probably to the Airdrie Savings Bank or something similar, and lots of other people will be doing exactly the same. I think the laughable one is BP. I mean, there's a view on Twitter that if BP goes, they'll take the oil with them. I mean, that's what we're talking about. We're talking craziness here. The Standard Life, for example, said exactly the same stuff prior to 1979 and the election, and 79, and then later on, and they're still here yet. They're not going to move 5,000 staff anywhere. It's all complete nonsense. Of course, it's all orchestrated. Didn't all happen to make these statements,
didn't it?
On that day.
It wasn't just coincidence.
It wasn't coincidence. No, it wasn't.
I thought the best thing yesterday was Sir Ian Wood was calling Sir Ian Wood a liar. It's like, who's lying? Sir Ian Wood or Sir Ian Wood?
He'd been misquoted apparently.
In the video of him actually making his original statement, he was misquoted from a video with a full piece of Sir Ian Wood saying...
Did you see him last night?
I did. His really
behaviour
weird.
was absolutely... It was just incredible behaviour. And how awful he was to the other expert in the wing. Called him a liar and everything under the sun. It was just shocking behaviour.
But it was so weird because those were his figures, you know. And so it's like,
he's in denial.
If he's a liar, then he's a liar.
Some people, not me, but other people suggest that might be for fracking rights elsewhere.
Yes,
and certainly in the case of BP, that the UK government might be supporting them in their claims to limit the damages for the spill in the Caribbean.
I would be surprised that nothing that the UK government does in this in this referendum. I mean, I'm surprised it hasn't happened sooner. That they've only recently discovered there is a referendum, and now they're all piling in. I thought it would have been sustained attack all through the summer.
With that in mind, Alice, I mean, it's an interesting question. There are 7 days left. I mean, the week today will actually be at the polling booths or doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
What do you think's yet to come down the pipe from the UK state in terms of fear-mongering?
Well, they've tried all the dirty tricks. I mean, they've always been scouting around for all the dirt they can find on senior yes people for the past 2 years. And, I mean, there's that waiting in the wings. They will drag out anything. They will bring in any country in the world. They will do anything to undermine Scotland.
North Korea says no.
Yes, probably. And ISIS, of course, are waiting in the wings for a yes victory.
Because they will then storm Scotland.
Presumably, yes.
That actually was one of the most disgusting interventions I've seen in recent weeks. I mean,
is this the George Robertson?
Yeah, that
was the Sunday Post.
The Sunday Post, and then it was followed up in the Scotsman. That poor man's family have kept quiet about his situation for 2 years in order not to rock any political boat or negotiations in Iraq. And to see the media use the referendum to bring that out and put it to the fore is one of the most vile things I have seen. That man has a family who are absolutely concerned about him. There is nothing that clearly that the media will not stoop to that is untouchable in order to portray.
So you think personal vilification will come into it in the coming week?
Probably. I mean, they will try absolutely anything. They're holding on to power and privilege, and they're not going to let that go without a huge struggle. I'm surprised it's been as nice as it has been up to now.
Well, maybe you're just thinking in terms of fight politics.
Oh, well, yeah, well, there you go. A minor by-election in the scheme of things, and all the big dirty guns of the Labour Party are brought into bear on a female. They wouldn't have done that if it had been a male candidate. It was the fact that they picked on a female candidate, and it's just so appalling.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, and that sounds clear. Just coming to the visit yesterday of Cameron, Clegg and Miliband, what do you make of that?
Do you know, I thought it was hilarious, because I was tweeting the day before, will David Cameron speak to any ordinary voters?
That's the key.
And he'd said, oh yes, time has come for me to go up to Scotland and sort this situation out and really find out what's going on. And he goes to Financial Services Authority. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't ordinary people that work there. I know
Scottish Widows.
It was the Scottish Widows, but I know people that work there who are voting yes.
Yeah.
I also know people who were saying today that they're voting yes and they work for Standard Life, and they don't recognise anything that is in the press with the messages that they have been told as a workforce.
Are you
about their
suggesting it was
jobs.
stage managed there, Natalie?
Well, yeah, you don't come up to Scotland and just, I'll just happen to nip into Scottish Widows and they're going to have a press conference there and a greeted assembly. It was completely stage managed, and it just shows the ignorance of Cameron, the Conservatives, Miliband and Labour. I mean, David Miliband, Freudian slip there, yeah.
Absolutely.
I think actually had David Miliband been in charge, it wouldn't have been quite so incompetent in the Labour Party. The Labour Party have run an absolutely dreadful campaign, and Ed Miliband is so ineffective. I think bringing him up here and exposing him to a very politicised Scottish electorate. I mean, this is the most educated Scottish electorate of however many years. Ed Miliband comes up and he doesn't have a clue. They're talking about more powers, which even when they announced them 4 months ago and repackaged them again this week, we're already so out of touch with what people in Scotland already wanted from many years. Social attitude surveys have shown 2/3 of Scottish people want full control of welfare and taxation, and that was before we started having this conversation about potential powers. So it's just so out of touch to kind of this patting on the head, there, and just I really want to make this point clear because I don't think it's been made anywhere. They do not have a democratic mandate to bring in new powers. There is absolutely no democratic mandate. The last time the Scottish electorate went and voted on any powers was in 2012 local elections, 2011 when we voted for a referendum on Scottish independence. A no vote does not give them a mandate to negotiate more powers, because what if we don't want the powers that they're offering them? We're not getting a choice on a referenda or a manifesto to vote whether or not, or which of those visions we would want. And I'm concerned, and I think people should be concerned, that actually the reason they want to give us these bits of power is to get rid of the Barnett formula, and then by forcing us to raise taxes because we have to get a percentage. It's a way of sneaking the austerity agenda through the back door. And I'm not sure I wouldn't prefer the status quo with the Barnett formula, so at least we have some protection to not knowing what we're getting and what is the motivation behind it, and not being able to go through the minutiae of that and be examined by the Scottish electorate.
It's
so disingenuous.
It's interesting. Dan Hodges for the Telegraph posted something similar. And Norman Tebbit as well, which makes strange bedfellows, I'm sure, posted something similar about the unconstitutional aspect of it. And William Hague's also made a comment regarding that.
William Hague's coming up to Glasgow today to do a speech.
Oh, well, hopefully it'll be along those lines. But it just seems, when you talk like that, Natalie, that what you're identifying is a confusion within the Better Together camp. That makes sense. That somehow they don't actually speak to each other and come out with a joint communique, because initially this was brought about by Gordon Brown speaking at a stage managed event when he made his comments. Alice, your eyes raised there.
Allegedly. I think the most telling comment of the triumvirate visit was Cameron standing up and saying, "This isn't like an election, you know." Duh. We all know that. We've been.
It wasn't an effing election.
No, he moved on to that later on. Give the Tories an effing kicking or something, I think.
As if that's vernacular people in Scotland.
And of course we've kicked the Tories for years. kicked them, it's had no impact because we have no power. So what is the point giving them a kicking? We kick them all the time. It has no impact. Yeah. So there's no point in that. So they come up to tell us that we're in the middle of a referendum. Well, we know that. We've been engaged in it for 2 years. They come up, they go back, they come up, they go back.
Yeah.
And hopefully this time the people of Scotland will see through it.
Well, let's hope so. So just to come back to the final point now, if yes, then what? And if no, then what?
Well, if yes, obviously we've got a lot of work to do.
Mm-hmm.
The team that are doing the negotiations with the UK have got a massive job. I want the strongest team possible. If that means that there are people that were on the no side, they're near negotiating, well, it probably means that they know the insides of their arguments a bit stronger than you might do. I think we need to have the strongest team. If that means international people as well, because there will be people who are used to negotiating treaties, etc. I mean, Graham Avery could potentially be an excellent negotiator. I'd want him in my team. He's done 27 of the 28 EU accession treaties, so he has a firm idea about. I mean, obviously that's not the unravelling, but there'll be a lot of issues around the same. So,
do you imagine the rhetoric would just evaporate overnight?
I think that we're going to see grown-up politics after a referendum. Mm-hmm. I don't think for a second that the rest of the UK will want to play political with the pound and the balance of trade figures after a yes vote. And then, we sort out that. We have the strongest team to do that. Start work on a constitution, a consultative constitution that brings people together. Say
more about that, because the guy coming in later on is John Drummond, chair of the Constitutional Commission, so I'm interested in your view to bring on to that.
I struggle with the constitution a little bit because I come from a legal background, and so part of me is about the purity of a constitution, which the difficulty of offering policy, what I reckon are policy agreements and making them lasting in a constitution, I find difficult, and it's part of the reasons that some constitutions end up being dragged through the courts constantly.
Yes.
And I don't think that that's particularly helpful. I mean, there are things I really would like to see in there. Ideologically, I would.
Right.
But in some ways, I think a constitution has to be a document which stands the test of time. And having a transient policy of a particular ideology put into it and impacting on future generations, I think is difficult. So I can see the reason why people want things in
Absolutely,
there. But then I think that's a reason to vote for political parties that continue to support
within the frame of the Constitution. The Constitution sets the frame.
I think if the founding fathers of the American Constitution had known the way that guns would be used in the 21st century, they might not have enshrined that right in the American Constitution. And we have got to be extremely careful. We can wrap up things like we'll protect the NHS, we'll do this, that, and the next thing. Every education will be free. I mean, without qualifying that to another degree.
Yes.
It's a very difficult one.
Yeah, it becomes
it can be challenged. Somebody wants educated as a something later on down the line. Well, that's my constitutional right. So it is extremely difficult, and I see the Constitution as being up there somewhere and everything developing below that, and we've got to be very careful. And I'm sure we will be, because there's other countries have developed modern constitutions, and we'll take the best of wherever it comes from.
Absolutely, and we'll look around to do that. Just, I know it's going to be difficult for you to conceive, but conceive of a no for a second, and then what?
After we wake up and cut our throats, then we'll probably...
It's a drastic reaction.
I mean, there will be a collective depression of the country that there was in 79. Things, I mean, people were depressed, there was no aspiration, so there will be a huge impact of a no vote. People will wonder if it was all worthwhile. All the hope, all the excitement will have gone, and we'll settle back down to something worse than what we've actually got at the moment, and there's lots of bad things coming down the line. The austerity measures, the Barnett consequentials, and the changing of that. An SNP perspective, we have got to manage then within a situation that we never ever wanted.